sassy. All right. Let's see here. Hmm. Mm. Good morning. Let's see here what we got going. Let's see. I think I'm going to take some time today to really look at GME more carefully. I hate to flood the Discord, but I got to put the links out. Sorry about that. Why is GME cooked? I mean, it was ridiculously overbought. That's a big part of it. I wouldn't say much else other than like that's kind of the main finishing on this curve. It's actually pretty straightforward. It's not really a very complicated setup here. This doesn't make it look like it's done, but it's done. That's kind of interesting. I wonder why it looks like that instead of... Yeah, I'm not sure what would the confusion be about why it's pulling back, you know? It's not overdone on a weekly, but it's definitely really overbought on like the 4 hour. Extremely overbought. You can't have like 20 to 30% moves and have like no pullbacks. That's pretty unusual. I'm not saying they haven't done it before. They've done it before, but yeah. This is like an older chart, so I redid it to make it simpler. So that's 6. That's the one I came up with. I think it's right. I mean, you might be a little bit off, but if it's off, it's not off by a lot. There's a question about whether or not we go up again. And I think that's all there is to it right here. It's like a secondary move, maybe around earnings. So this was really expected, though. I mean, I had this on the chart before we got up here, and well, maybe as we got up here, I should say. There was not really a great expectation that we were just going to keep going. On my part, anyways. So I think what this is it basically like somebody changed their mind right here. I would ignore the headlines about GME because right now the headlines are saying that the reason it's selling off, I looked yesterday and almost all the headlines were like, people are fleeing GME because they purchased 500 million Bitcoin or something. That's a bunch of hoopla. I mean, that's a bunch of nonsense, right? First, it's like, why are they buying? Why is GME going up? And then it's like, oh, now that it's bought it, it's going down. It's like very reactive journalism. Frankly, I'm starting to find that more and more that like, unless it's something that's just analyzing the nature of the stock, like almost all of these articles are just garbage. Like absolute garbage. Like they're just terrible. They don't give you good information. They just give you reactive information, and they're trying to like come up with excuses for why things are going. So they're just looking at like a correlation and saying that that's the cause. I think that's a bit absurd. You have no reason to wonder why this pumped or dropped. If you look at the technical side, it was building out towards it. And there was an expected drop. Like, you can very simply just look at this and say that when this bought up, it pushed really hard. There's a huge buy-in, right? But it's also probably like a lot of selling too. I mean, you have an acceleration of volume into the top. That's not very normal if you think about it. Because like, why would you peak volume right here? You know, just think common sense wise. A better way to look at stronger volume would be like, look at this bottom, for example. You can see what's going on very, very easily right here. Like the contrast of the two, okay? So when you have a strong bottom, there's higher volume. You can see it right there. I'm just kind of gonna bar it out. There's actually stronger bottom from the low, there's stronger volume from the bottom. And then as it builds up and gets to the top, the volume starts dropping. That's healthy. You've got heavy volume on the bottom, which means that the sellers are being bought out and it's pushing. The effort is there, but it's like clearly there's more people buying low than buying, quote unquote, buying high, right? And then you also have a lack of sellers here, so you're not getting this huge influx on these peaks. So you get this really nice rounded top, which is part of the reason why I really like Apple right now. And like, even though it may look not the greatest, it's got this kind of rounded structure to it. And I don't know where my volume is on this chart. For some reason, it's not here. I need to put volume back on here. But those kind of movements are like ideal. Like, you don't want to see like super high volume tops. So like the ramp should be coming from the bottom down, and you should be kind of curling out because you want that seller exhaustion to be more natural. This is very much like the opposite going into this peak. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that in the grand scheme of things, like on the biggest possible picture, this could end up being like a volume ramp from a bottom, but it's really volume that was brought about by this breakout. And this breakout has a lot of little technical problems with it. One, there's a gap that was created. We probably have another gap down below around 26, but there's certainly one at like $28. Why would that matter? Because $28 was the level that we really, we've been working on this since back here in November. You know, like this whole region has been absolutely critical. This 2850 area, absolutely critical. For GME. And so it makes sense that there might be a gap there and you have some kind of like pressure cooker kind of push. But once it got to that point, it jumps this creek. There's a huge buy-in because people see that as a bullish signal. But unlike the previous kind of ramp here off this bottom, where you have heavier volume on the bottom and then it like lightens up, you get a backup, heavier volume on the bottom here, lightens up, you get a little bit of backup, and then another advancement. This has extreme volume going into a top motion. As a technical trader, you should always be paying attention to that because it seems like it's going parabolic, which people think is really good for some reason. And I get why, but like there's been times where GME and AMC, maybe some of these meme stocks have gone parabolic and you're like, it's squeezing, it's exciting. That's like peak FOMO though. That's exactly the reason why I was stressing, like, don't wait and try to catch a top when it's doing this, because you're getting that peak volume. It's the same thing every time. And if it has this kind of ramp in volume into a top, when it does pull back, it's usually very violent because there's already a lot of sellers in this region right here. Like, that's a clear indication, this high volume. Look at the effort that's being put in at each of these legs, and you'll see what I mean. It's like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And like each of these legs is putting more and more and more and more and more effort into it as it's going up, but they're not gaining significantly more from that effort. It's very, like, it's almost too common sense, right? That we don't, like, sometimes people don't pay attention to it, but like that's one of the best indicators that you have is just volume versus price. It's very simple. And you can think about effort. As this is pushing up, it's facing more and more resistance, and so it's not getting as much return for the amount of volume that's being put in because it's costing more to push it up because there's more sellers. It's very straightforward. Now, most people, I think, know that, but then when you look at it and then you come back and if you're surprised that this happened, then you really aren't getting that. You're not understanding that, like, this is not healthy, so to speak, in terms of, like, again, short term. I'm not saying super long term it couldn't be fine. It could be, because the next action does matter, which is what happens after the pullback, right? But there was definitely an expectation that it was going to pull back here. My target was like 35. It hit 35.85. I said 32 to 35 is what I said, because it was going to come up to the previous top here. It had possibilities because of the S curve here that this was going to go a bit higher, like maybe all the way up to like 35. And when I looked back at this, I put 35 on the chart. I went back and just checked it out, and it looked right. So that was my target from the beginning. I was a little off on timing, as you're aware, by a couple days. It's not a huge deal, but it was off. But anyways, the expectation is it's going to pump, and then what? Well, I don't necessarily have all the answers, right? So my answer to that was, I'm not going to hope against hope that this somehow just keeps going through this wall that's there. This is a distribution level. It's extremely clear that this is a distribution zone. There's been almost no trading in it except for these wicks, these gigantic candles with high volume. That means there's been a massive amount of selling above 35 here. When last time we approached this, we didn't even get up to 35, and we retreated all the way back down for liquidity. And then on the biggest picture, you can go back to earlier on in GME, and this isn't meant to sound like condescending or anything. I'm just saying, like, know your levels, like be aware of where it's going and what's the problem there. This is the region right here. So it makes sense that your operators would not want to go through here until they're ready to advance, because if you get through this level, right? Remember, this was support. The last time this was support was in 2021. That's a long time ago, right? And it was really a distributive support, meaning it was buying up into this top. So there's a clear effort, I think, to keep the stock below $50. And it's really goes back to, again, some of this earliest buy-in. This is essentially like the biggest, ceiling we have. You could see there's other levels there. I mean, if we were to do the same thing, you could say, like, well, this is the same exact kind of thing as this. So we're just going to keep hitting resistances. Yeah. I mean, that's the way that the market trades, right? Like, if we left it as a resistance, then it's currently a resistance until it's not. So there's a lot of things that have to be kind of taken into consideration here. I think that the simplest explanation is usually the easiest, and that is that it got really, really overbought. It had extremely high RSI on like the 4-hour and even up to the daily. I mentioned it on I don't know for a fact on GME, I didn't really look, but on AMC, the recent buy-up was higher on the daily RSI than it was in May when we ran 300%. And I think part of the reason is that the price action did that in after hours back in May, but we were extremely overbought. So naturally, you're going to need some kind of a pullback. So I don't really see this as anything but right now a retracement. And when I looked back at this, the reality is very simple. Where is the support? Well, if you don't hold this top immediately, which wasn't likely going to happen, then you have a possibility of support right here at 30, 50. That's kind of the next one up. Right here. This wasn't a support for very long, was it? Did you see the last time we were here? This didn't act as a support almost at all, right? It barely topped off there, and it used it as a distributive top. So could you still do something like that? Yeah. Has it already kind of punched through it once Yeah, I mean, it's already kind of shown a little bit of weakness here. And I think you just have to take that with a grain of salt for now, because it's like, who knows, you know. But it bounced off and came below it, just like it did back here. So is it going to advance? Is it going to hold? I don't know. Even if it came back up, it already punched through it. You might just come back up to sell off again and head down. But this time is a little different because this major level of resistance at 28.30, we have broken out. We have another opportunity, just like we did back here. This was near earnings as well, to come back and retest 28.50 on GameStop. And so when I look at this, I'm not particularly concerned unless it drops through there. Like, there's nothing else really to say. Like, from a liquidity standpoint, from a, you know, hey, is this going to go standpoint, we're asking those questions. That's really the key level. And again, you can see it's been acting that way ever since probably back here when we first came up. This was where we tried to hold supports, where we sold off in June. We sold off again in July. Like 28 is a big, big, big deal. So it has to be proven as a support. Is this support? No, not really. Is it close to support? Yeah. It chopped along 28 and then pushed away from it. But we've done this before. That happened back here as well. Chopped along 28 and pushed away from it. We really need to see that back up and with some strength hold a higher low here above 28. It's the impetus is on the bulls. Like the emphasis is that the bulls have to show stopping power, that we're not going to keep retreating every time we hit these walls. We're going to hold our ground. And if it holds ground here, then it should be pretty healthy. You know, I had maybe an idea that what may happen, and it depends. There's different ways to look at this. Because right now it's starting to look a lot like what this did, which is kind of went parabolic, and then it has this deep back up into earnings. The volume is very different than it was back here. You can see like peak volume was not on this peak in November 2024, right before earnings. It wasn't there. It was earlier on. Peak volume certainly seems to be right at this top right now, which would make me think that this could be a pretty deep pullback. Like it would not surprise me if, unlike that time, you know, if you were doing like a 1-to-1, you'd say, well, it should come up and then go up again. Yeah, I mean, sort of like what we already have. It wouldn't surprise me if we actually went down pretty hard, you know, either. Because at this point, I'm like, it could happen. Oh, we can go up or we can go down. Thanks, Booksy. Right? That's always the comment. Look, it's about looking at that volume and saying, well, it is different. And this has a really significant retracement anyways. This is almost a throwback to the bottom. I mean, it comes way below the 854 here on the retracement. So for us to come back to like 28 would not be weird. Like it would be totally normal. And we've already pushed again through that 30-80 area. So I'm not particularly concerned about GameStop. I'm also in the position where I'm not like trading it anymore. Like I traded this and that was it. Like I'm done for now. I'm going to wait and see what happens. You know, and we can use, to some degree, we can use AMC, not like by itself, but to some degree you can use AMC to kind of understand maybe a little bit better what may occur going into the 9th. This says the 4th. Some people said the 13th or the 12th. I saw that. I saw another one that said the 9th. So I think they're going to release the data on the 9th. I'm not sure if their investor meetings in the same place. It doesn't really make a huge difference. This S-curve, I don't think it's done. So just to be clear, like you might think that this is finished. I don't think so. I think there's another push-up. So if you're wondering like, well, is it over? Is that the end of it? No, I don't think it is. I think there's another push-up that's going to happen, and I think it's probably going to try for like 37 or maybe even significantly higher. It could be like near 40. Again, because there's these alternating movements. This guy right here, this triangulation right here is very interesting to me from the bottom versus the top, because this also would indicate like let's just say a rotational symmetry. That like it met this marker, it retreats, and then it goes back up. If you're looking at it in reverse, you see that? And that kind of motion. I don't like think that every single time this has to happen. This isn't like a rule or something. It's just like an observation. Like sometimes this seems to happen where you get this rotation. So it would make sense to me if this backed up and then pushed up again and maybe even goes again up to like near 40. It's totally possible, which is again kind of what I had on the chart looking back. And I think if it has a weakness here, which it seems to have right there, and it does go straight back up, then I'm going to be waiting and seeing if there's a deeper backup after earnings. You know, it's totally possible in my opinion. I don't think it has to be there. This is not one of those, it has to do this, it has to do that kind of things. We've talked about 3 or 4 different methods that this could kind of get to the same points of interest. Almost all my paths have us coming back down to 28, but that's just because of that concept in my brain that we just discussed, which is you should come back, I think, and check this creek. If it's truly going to be like supported. Well, what if the stopping power is above there and it just doesn't check it? Does that mean that it's going to come back way later? Yes and no. I mean, if this were AMC, I would say, yeah, it's coming back. You know what I mean? Like AMC has never skipped a beat. Is it always done this on GME? No. Like this is an example right here of that where you have a early backup, like kind of like building out a support here. And it does come back down and gets pretty low. It gets pretty close to it, but it never came all the way back down to the creek. Now the argument could be, and I keep this in the back of my head, as I'm sure you all are aware that I've talked about this before. There is a potential that this is distributive even now. You know, we don't want it to be, but if it was, you'd be in a pretty bad spot because you'd have to come all the way back and retest all these levels that you dropped, sure. But this creek is now like super, super, super low. And there's been a dime a dozen times where this has happened and you get this kind of early push and then it drops all the way back down. This is a great example right here, actually. Right here, because it's like you didn't think, oh, it's not going to come back, you know, it's not going to come back down to the bottom again. But the checks were not that adequate. And so once it gets to this point, it gets up high, it distributes, where's it going to go? Are creeks really that important? Yeah, they are. I mean, the market uses them. I don't really need much else explanation, you know, wise. I just kind of assume that that's the case. So this generated a bit of a higher push, right? It generated another cross here, and then that's what was used. It did do a full retracement, though. So like if I were looking backwards at this time period and saying like the same thing, I'd be probably looking at this and saying, well, there's probably another one right here at this point. And these, again, could be slightly curved, like more of a curvature. But, you know, if we're asking the question, could this come back down and do this or that? Absolutely. Yeah, it could. In fact, if you look at this as like a double top with a huge backup, look at where it goes to. It goes almost all the way back down to that bottom. I'm not trying to be discouraging. I'm just kind of going from where we're at right now. I'm just kind of moving forward with our thought process. I'm really not trying to like discourage anybody. Like, oh, GME is going to definitely drop. Don't know about that. But the concept here is very similar, right? We've talked about how this looks like an iteration of the bigger picture. It really does. And what matters is whether this crosses up or fails and crosses down. If it crosses down, it's really just like, in some ways, it's just like this, right? Where you have this kind of wave structure where it's jumped above, but then it fails to advance, right? And it comes all the way back to that creek. Guys, that's not any different than somebody coming along and suggesting that this could happen. Now, there's some kind of like mixed feelings I have about this because, and we've gone through this on GME a few times, but like I have a lot of mixed feelings about it because there's a double S curve kind of deal, and on the one hand, even if it came low, you'd probably be like, okay, meaning that it wouldn't be the end of the world, because in the grand scheme of things, there's actually a bigger S curve that goes way, way, way high. But if this were to come down and try to test low and it held up, that's still really bullish, you know? It is. Well, how long does that go on? I don't know. If this is where we get to the more like Booksy-esque theories of the things that I tend to talk about that are a bit more like out there. There's a concept in my head of like iterative motion, and I usually think about it as big influences small. Like the small scale is like lemmings, and they're following what the big picture has typically done. And in this case, though, we're in the avant-garde. We're like at the forefront of the iterations at this point. We're always at the forefront rather. So they're always kind of evolving and completing themselves. And you can't really know unless you can get some kind of hints that maybe this is the way it's going to go on the big picture. So for example, if right now this were to follow through on what happened here on that jump, you would probably expect that this is a cat ear, which it looks like. You know, make no mistake about it. It does look like it. You've got a paw, you've got ear 1, right? If this ends up being ear 2, which I already think it is, and we've already talked about this multiple times, right? We did the whole reason we did that S-curve iteration thing with the chops, and this is exactly where it's supposed to be. This is why I was talking about 28 back here and where this was going to be and whether or not it crossed up versus crossing down was really significant, and it is. If this were to cross down, which hasn't happened, by the way, so far it's looking up, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be higher and cross down. So we still have to keep that in mind. If this were to cross down, it would be very consistent, perhaps, with what happened here, albeit this one, interestingly, this went very much up, right? Kept going up. There's this concept that it may appear to us, which is kind of foreign to GameStop, in that we wouldn't have seen this just yet. But it's kind of like this, where you get the second push higher. Perhaps that's the best way to describe it. And I'm not sure. My brain, I'd have to kind of like relax a little bit this morning and let my brain kind of figure that out, because thered be some kind of a second push here, but it would then fail maybe around 40. And then you'd have a drop back down. Okay, I can't right now. You could come back to it later if it's something you can't do. Ask me what it is. I'm not coming over there. A what? Is that a rock scroll? It's got some green and red stuff. What? You're doing the moon quest? Yeah. So I don't understand how you're supposed to do this. The lock? Yeah. I don't either. It looked confusing. See if you can figure it out. I can't figure it out. All right. I'm in the middle of a stream. Just a minute. I'm going to see if I can help my son. He's playing Hogwarts Legacy. It says in the mini game, are you listening? Are you listening? Yeah. It says in the mini game, use the left and right thumbstick to rotate the inner and outer circles until the gears in the bottom right and the middle start spinning. Hold the sticks in these positions to unlock. So you're supposed to move it until you see those gears start spinning and hold it in that position. Well, hold it. But I think you're supposed to do both. The bottom and the middle. That's what it says. Bottom right and middle. Everything else is going to be up to you to just figure out. That's all it says. Okay? Remember, it's just a puzzle. All right. So in these, I don't really know what to make of this. Maybe there's something we can glean from it, because this jumped the creek and it has this kind of double up thrust motion, but I think it's kind of the same as this. I would look at this guy as this. So I don't really know. And then the rest of it would be a double top. So what we could do, and this is where things get kind of tricky, is we could look at this motion altogether and consider it as this one. And in this case, it actually came back down. Well, that does seem right, because that's an S curve. But you can't really like guarantee that the iterations are going to be the same, because that's what I'm trying to say. Like, this gives you maybe a general idea, but you can't really know that it's going to do the same thing, because it has to have, at some point it's going to change character, because it has to have a resolution. If it just kept doing the same thing indefinitely, it would always do this, and it would just do it again and again and again. You just chop sideways forever, right? Like, especially right here, you can see this is going sideways. So if it goes slightly upward, it would just kind of go slightly upward forever. At some point, it has to have a definitive end. So there will be a change. So one thing I'm like kind of thinking about in the back of my head is, does this jump over the creek every time? Yeah. So the first move is a jump over the creek, jump over the creek, jump over the creek. So we're looking for that second move, and we're saying, well, does the second move jump over the creek? This is where things get a little bit complex, because it's like, well, yeah, kind of, because we have this as a second move jumping over this creek. There's a lot of nuance to it, right? It's like, as long as this keeps jumping up and crossing creeks, then you don't really have to figure out the answer, because if it continues to do that, then it's bullish, right? But if it starts to reverse at some point, and that's where this comes in, then you know that it's changed character. It's no longer doing that motion. You're kind of at the end of the iterations. So what I had thought was that probably back here, though I'm not going to try to sit here and solve it perfectly, this is a creek jump, right? So this is an M cross right there. So what I thought is that probably, without even having to like figure it out, so to speak, what we're seeing is like change of character, right? Like previously this was not jumping, and now it starts jumping the creeks. And so once it jumps, it just keeps jumping and it doesn't come back. And that's what gives you these huge moves, right? Because you get to the end of an iterative motion down, where it just keeps iterating down and it changes character. So it's not as like heady perhaps as it could be. It's just like, the question is just, does it continue to keep jumping creeks, right? Simple enough. But I have to just say, from a helicopter perspective, sorry, I didn't mean to delete that, that this, if this did not advance, right, that this could easily be very misleading. So one thing that tends to happen is that when you go into a distribution, what often will happen in the final cat ear, as we call it, is that you get kind of a fake out. And I'm not saying this is necessarily going to happen here, so don't hear me wrong, all right? We'd have to look at the evidence and see if it's supported. But a lot of times you get this kind of iterative motion down, right? And it generates like a ear one, ear two kind of thing. Usually these two are higher, and they are. So you get this kind of cat ear structure. I shouldn't have done it like that. I should have done it like this. Because this is, in my opinion, this is like a simpler way of understanding it, because it's like ear one, ear two, instead of talking about all the iterations together. I've looked at this diagram with you guys a lot, okay, on this stream, because it's the main diagram, right? And in order for this to be bullish, you already know what has to happen. In order for this to be bullish, when it gets to the end, this has to cross up and not come back down. And then it looks like really like a wedge breakout, frankly. Pretty straightforward. It could have a flush first, and that's what we call a spring. So if it has a flush first, then what you get is the same thing, but it doesn't advance right away. Instead, you get a flush first, but then it advances. And Bulkowski would call that like a double flush or a double whatever reversal. And he would say that's a very strong signal. Wyckoff would call it a spring, because if this had set up correctly, then this is like a phase B right here. And so the spring is usually just a dip below that phase B. It will look like a breakdown. For somebody that's looking at it like it's just a wedge, it would just look like a breakdown initially, right? This is, again, you've heard me stress that it needs to cross back up over the ice. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Like when I say that, this guy right here, it has to happen this way. And then each of these drop ledges becomes a really significant marker. Again, you've probably heard me say this multiple times. This is kind of like all of the information that I use and need to understand this reversal pattern. That's it. It's just the one structure. So if this goes to the upside and it just breaks out, that does happen. There's no spring. It's usually like an LPS. That's like a more traditional wedge breakout. And it is a cat ear. You're still going to see the same formations here. The volume will be different. You won't have a sign of weakness. No sign of weakness in here. That's important to note. There's very rarely a sign of weakness, but it still goes into like a spring motion. That's a spring. However, if there's a sign of weakness and there's clear indication that this is bearish early on, usually we see something kind of the opposite. So if you have a reversal pattern, the most typical of these is that, and I'll have to kind of fudge it in just a second. I'm going to do this real quick. So the most typical of these is that you'll get a, it will be early on or like the first or second hit, but typically there's like an LSPY right here, or excuse me, a preliminary support right here. And I didn't mention that before. If it doesn't come below the preliminary support and it continues to build out, a lot of times that can be considered bullish as long as there's no weakness early on. Okay. The sign of weakness appears in one of two places. It either appears right here early on, where this is like pointing down. This is like a sign of weakness where it drops below the preliminary support. So that auto reaction, if you were to flip the chart, the auto reaction right here like comes too high. It's already trying to like reverse. Okay. So that's called the auto reaction from the buying climax. Well, what if it has a deep sell-off and then a reaccumulation? Like what happened with AMC? That's complicated because that's a whole nother schematic. This is also part of the reason why distribution and reaccumulation schematics look almost identical, and they do. And if you read like Wyckoff 2.0, you find that they're pretty hard to distinguish. The main thing you have to use is volume. The other place you might get a sign of weakness is potentially like right here at the end. So these are interchangeable. These aren't like one or the other. You can have a little bit of both, but you could have another one where it's in a slightly different spot where this is like kind of the same, and then you get this really nasty sign of weakness here. This is the one we typically see on AMC, is that it kind of fails right here, and then what typically will happen at the end when that happens is you actually get another upthrust at the end. That's more commonly what we see on AMC, for example, is you get a really nasty like weakness here. Like it'll hit the bottom once and then it'll drop really severely through it for a moment. You think it's a spring, but it's too early. It hasn't even come back up again. Especially if it came below like there, right? You get an SOW. It looks like this guy, it looks like this guy, but your timing is off because you think that it's already gone far enough. And then almost always when it does that, you get this kind of early breakout. So again, it's meant to kind of deceive you. It sort of looks like this, but earlier on. And it happens too soon. And then almost always what happens is that at the very end, you get this upthrust that goes slightly above that top, and that's a UT. So the range itself is sort of like built out this way, right? It's not really including the buying climax as much. The buying climax is almost irrelevant in all of these accumulation models because In these cases, we're talking about coming from the bottom, right? There's another one where it does another upthrust early on. That does happen sometimes. So in the distribution, this might come down. It may even form a sign of weakness and then go all the way up higher. You know, that happens. That's also a UT. Really doesn't matter where that appears, but this is more typically what we see. So right now, my bigger concern on GME has more to do with, I guess, this guy and this guy. If I had to pick two, because I think that these two are the most likely candidates based on what we've seen, especially given the fact that when this jumped up, it came all the way back down and retraced. We don't really get a feeling that that has to happen on the big picture. It could be that that's enough. It kind of like made it there, right? It hit that area. But certainly you can't rule it out. You can't rule out the possibility that, well, yeah, it's making higher highs, but... So why do you think it could be that case, Booksy? Why do you think it's one of those two? I'll tell you why. Because it did come back down through that rising trend. It did not do this, right? And it didn't really do this. I don't see a serious sign of weakness here early on because it never came back below that buy-in. It didn't. It made higher highs. So we can kind of look at these diagrams and rule out, I think we can rule out two possibilities. I think we can rule out this one. It's pretty unlikely that it's this guy. At least on the big picture as like a diagram. This doesn't seem right, so I'm going to like put a red line through it or something, okay? That one doesn't seem very likely. We also have to rule out this one because it did come back down through. So which is it? Good question. I mean, what I said is that I thought that this looked a little bit whack to me because when this came back down, it definitely dipped through that bottom. And it was strange to me that this hit a double low, like low, pumped up again, and then hit a new low. That looked kind of weak to me, like the stopping power wasn't there, which is strange. Did it check the creek? Yeah. Did it make a new low on the bigger picture? No. I mean, it made a higher low on the bigger picture. But the truth is very simple, which is you cannot come back down. You just can't. You can't come back down through this again. So there's this problem. It doesn't really matter how you draw this, by the way. It doesn't make any difference. It always goes through it. So one of the biggest concerns here is that this is already a sign of weakness. Right? Like this did not hold up where it needed to. And that all of this is going to be distributive, going up into a corner. Again, does it have to be that way? Well, that's where we come to this other diagram, right? It's like you have to then make a judgment call about, well, which one do you think it is? You don't think it's these two because it didn't have an early sign of weakness. It didn't. But it also didn't hold the ice level the whole time. It didn't. So that can't be true. Has it made this kind of an upthrust? Yeah. Technically it did because it just came above that top. So are we in a bad situation? It looks a lot like this one, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. Could it be this earlier scenario? Good question. Which is it, Booksy? Pick one. I don't have to pick because there's at least one thing that would confirm it, right? If you're not sure about it and you really don't know for sure, there's one thing that would have to confirm, and that is it's going to break through. At some point, it's going to break through both the ice and that falling motion. It may not happen all at once. It may be like that I drew this kind of weird. It could be that one breaks earlier than the other. So you could have something like this where it looks like it's even holding back, just like this one kind of jumps back up and then comes back down. This is even more deceptive because then you're waiting to see if it's going to hold the second. And this is where you usually get like a really nasty S-curve or something like that. If it fails, it could even be like a SOS with a backup, right? In the case of this one, can this come back down and hit pretty low? Yeah. The backup. So it's either a UT and it's going to back up and drop, or it's an SOS and it's going to back up, right, and hold. So the reason that I'm not concerned yet is because we don't have any like definitive answer. So this isn't that complicated to me. Like I'm really focusing on, and I've been focusing on the ice, which is here. And I think that's kind of the final stop. If it came down to that point and broke through it, I don't personally see how anyone could look at that and still find it to be bullish, unless it's some kind of crazy bear trap, which is very elaborate and almost doesn't make sense, or unless it has another change of character. But that's a different conversation. Change of character usually has to do with outside lurking variable circumstances. It very rarely happens without something influencing it, like an earnings or something like that. It's pretty unusual. The change of character is a bit of a cop-out in Wyckoff because it typically is like, oh, it's doing one thing, it has a certain behavior, like it's already created like a upthrust, which a Wyckoff would look at and say, that's, all right, check, it's distributive. And then all of a sudden it does an accumulation in like a lower middle pocket or something of the range. And you're like, whoa, what happened? And then it goes the other way. That kind of happened on AMC back here. There was a distributive action right here on earnings. And then it came up and it created a bottom and it jumped the creek. And that was a change of character. It didn't change the overall outlook of the range at that time. It was kind of just like, well, now we're going to go up. And it did. It went all the way to the top. That right there was a change because it had already done what looked like a distribution. It's almost the same motion, isn't it? It's like they did it again, but just bigger. I mean, if you look at the motion there, that's what I'm trying to say is like, that's a bizarre move. Like it already did this up thrust and then it dropped through the creek, but then it just reverses and it does it again. It's really strange. Very strange, right? Because it had already kind of shown that, oh, it's going to break down. And it did. So, I mean, like there's an oddity to some of these movements that you can't really say you could have anticipated that, you know? You probably look back and say, well, Booksy, you thought that it was going to go up at least to there and maybe even higher. Well, yeah, I did, but I wouldn't have imagined it would go this way. Like I could not have imagined this kind of a trap mechanism. And then for whatever reason, someone taking it back up again and like creating a double bottom right after that is very strange. You know what I mean? That's kind of the most cop-out you get in Wyckoff with the change of character terminology, but you have to identify it when it happens because it happens. This is very strange, okay? So that could happen, but like right now, if you were looking at this saying, well, is this possibly distributive? Well, maybe. We were looking at this as this could be the top of an S-curve down. And I don't want to like kind of flip-flop diagrams constantly here, but just remember like this was something that was in our mind for a while because we were not sure early on, if you're following the channel, if it was going to follow this guy or follow this guy. This one seemed like an earlier move to me, but it was the only thing I could say for sure was that there was a very strong likelihood that this area right here is the middle of, what if the cross of these waves is the middle of the four top cat ear? This is what we did a long time ago before it even went up to 28. We were back here. And the answer is like, it is, right? Like that was the question. That's the hypothesis. And the answer is that I'm pretty sure that we figured out what's going on in the middle of the cat ear. Why does it look like the way it looks? Why does it create this shrinking iteration? And it's a combative region, essentially, of breakout or breakdown. And you're creating signal posts, right? You're creating upthrust, you're creating weaknesses, or you're creating LPS, you're creating sign of strength, right? One or the other. And that's typically where it happens. So right now, is this possibly like an upthrust, right, that's going to try to distribute back down? Yeah, it's possible. What happens if it distributes back down, Booksy? Well, again, it may seem a little bit complicated, but it's in some ways it's not at all. You know, there's not. We talked about the upside. There's not really any other supports. We talked about these downward motions. We've broken all the creeks to the upside. At this point, the last creek that's surviving is the one that we were just talking about, like this guy. You know, and that's it. After that point in time, there's nothing else you can draw here that needs to be jumped. Everything else is now upward. So when you go to the next one, I think it's right here. We just pushed on that. That's the next one. It's up. And then the next one after that is like here. You're just looking at tops, basically. So they just start going up. Right? Everything before that is down. Like the next one up right after that is this guy. But we already jumped that. Okay, well, could it come all the way back down to that one? Yeah. And I made a point to say that earlier, because I was saying that, again, it could come all the way back to 28. That wasn't like willy-nilly. That was me saying like this kind of motion right here would be the M cross, essentially. And that would be the middle of the M, the S curve, right? So you'd have this giant jump over the creek, and you come all the way back down to 28 or 2750 even. That's really low, but that's no different than looking at like kind of the high creek here and saying, well, did we check this guy thoroughly? Maybe not. We chopped along it for a bit and then broke out, but I don't see why this couldn't come all the way back down. What happens when you get down here though? You're probably going to identify it if you've been somewhat kind of following this, is now you're going to be at that near that ice level. So you've got a lot of possibility here going low that if it took a long time, potentially even till August, and that was one of the scenarios that I drew out, was this could top off and come back down into August. Yeah, that's where I'd probably see it. I drew that way too high. That's probably where I'd see it on the whole. Like, okay, that could happen. This is still bullish because you can see here that even though this broke out down below the triangle, it came above it. If it finds a support there, that could be an SOS with a backup. It just has to hold it. It cannot break down here in August. Well, AMC, we have this idea that it might be breaking out in August. Like, that's my concept right now. It's like, well, it probably does take till August, you know. So this gives you a huge amount of time to do a lot of goofy stuff. More than likely, if it did take this route, it would not go necessarily just down. You'd probably see a series of up thrusts that try to continue higher. It'd be very volatile, kind of like this was. You have like big swings. You'd have what we call like a four top, and it would fail at the end and be really nasty because usually it's very flat. And the only reason I'm thinking that on GME as opposed to like downward is because GME's been pretty strong. Yeah, but you said this was the middle of the cat ear. Correct. It is the middle of the cat ear on the bigger picture. Oh, I don't like this book. See, it gets too confusing. Too bad. Sorry. You know, I get that this is obnoxious, but like this is pretty normal. Like I feel like this is very straightforward in some ways because it's like my expectation is it's probably going to do something similar to the big picture, but do it smaller right here. So that's usually what the cat ears look like. They look like everything again, happening all over again to some degree, right? So you'd have some kind of like a bigger motion up, and then you'd have probably a deep pullback. This is a bizarre phenomenon, so I'm not sure. So yeah, I mean, could it look pretty darn similar? Yeah, I think so, you know. You'll have like a more upthrust motion, and then it'll drop or whatever, yada, yada, yada. Does it have to look exactly the same? No. The concept here is that, again, you're on the avant-garde. You're on the frontmost part of the train all the time. You're not in the caboose. You're at the engine room. So everything behind you is still generated. It's like it's part of the bigger sequence, which is confusing at first, and it took me a long time to really wrap my head around that. But what that means is like if I'm here on this big picture, and I haven't generated like the cat ears yet, then it's going to look like that pretty much everywhere that I look. And then as I go into the cat ears, right, like it's going to look like that again as we're developing forward. So if this is developing across up on the small picture, it's going to be developing across up on the big picture, and so on and so forth. It really goes the other way around, but you're always on the front of the train is what I'm trying to say. It's kind of like leaving that trail behind. Well, then we can't predict everything that happens. No. But why would the operators in the market give you like a perfect blueprint all the time? They wouldn't, Like they're not going to give you every single answer, which is what people want. That's the problem with it, right? So there's a certain amount of somewhat predictive elements to it. How do we know that this could still work? Because I use the same predictive measure to understand what might happen here. So if you're wondering, like, does this actually work, and is it easy enough that I can do it? Yeah, I'm a regular nobody from a nobody town and nobody place who's done, pretty average human life things, including some other things that aren't great. These are things that anybody can do. You don't have to be some kind of special whiz kid or something nonsensical like that. And it's not special information either. I'm giving you everything that I have. The interpretation of it is where things get kind of muddy. And I guess that's where things can be wrong, But is it pretty consistently correct? Is it correct is the answer. Yeah, it is. But human error is human error. And if I'm 99% right, but I kind of got the overall picture wrong, then I could be just frankly wrong with that last 1%, and it could all be wrong. That's not really fair, is it? No. But that's what the stock market is, right? So it's better at this point for us to look at this and just consider what are the possibilities, and consider that like GME just made a higher push. That puts us into a couple different brackets. It doesn't really give us a lot of other information just yet. We know that this could have been an SOW. It's possible that this was a sign of weakness. It did break through twice that ice level, which would make this a UT. There's a danger there. The only other possibility is that this was a kind of spring motion. It went into that spring motion after pumping up, and it's jumped it. Well, how do we know which it is? It's, again, boil it down to like the basics. The basics are very simple. At this point, if you've seen this marker, it's only one of two things. It's either that this is now going to create a backup that's strong and continue, or it's a UT. If it drops beneath, and it's possible, right? If this drops beneath the ice level here, down here at like $23 or $24, especially that 24, that's been a big kind of hinging point. I don't think I could say there. Again, it's like this idea of like you could try to say, well, it's a bear trap. It's a bear trap. But you just have to read the chart as it is. And if it dropped below that level, there's nothing else I could say. I could be wrong. It could be a bear trap and it ends up reversing in some weird way. But again, you can't predict those things. Like I was saying on AMC back here, it's like, why did it do that? I don't know. There's something happened with somebody changing their positions and taking it up again, or wanting to do something else. Like, I don't know what it was, but there was a change of character. And even then it didn't change the outlook, but it was temporarily different. That was just an example. I can't predict that this is going to go into a bear trap. You just can't do it. So I'd have to say that by August 6th, which seems to be the AMC earnings date as well. I mean, this is the same place these intersect. They're not connected, some people say. Well, I think they are, timing-wise. Because right now we're at a really important turning point for these tickers. Well, if this goes down, then AMC's going down. Well, yeah, but we already knew that. It would be a lot like them to do that too, to some degree. I've said before, I think that it's possible that GME just keeps going here. It's actually higher up and ready to break out. come August, not down low. But if it managed to hold up, as long as it held up here, could they both run in August in a similar fashion to what you're expecting on AMC, where this might come back down into August 6th? Yeah. Are they consistent? Yes. How so? Well, remember, this is the December top, and it goes back, and there's like a huge creek coming down and all this other stuff. This is basically a massive creek retest coming back down. It's lower because all of these angles are super low. It's also creating a spring on the big picture. Yeah? Because of how low all those angles are. It's positioned already. It's like kind of like bearish directions already being looked at. But for GME, it's not all low, is it? It's like the directional input is pretty high. It could stay in a very bullish situation if it kind of stays above 24 here going into August. And both would be fine. Like both would be, according to their own purposes, like doing the right thing, so to speak. So if you were to say that like both of them squeezed for some reason in August going into eventually, February, there's like 3 different ways. I kind of looked at this, and I already did the diagram. I think I just deleted them a few minutes ago. I looked at like 3 different possibilities, but a lot of it has to do with coming back to near 28.50. A lot of it has to do with the ice level down here at like 24, and that's kind of it. If between now and August, GME drops back into here and it loses, the first one is going to be this creek, which is probably going to be a loss of like $27 to $26. Depends on when we get there, but I'm doubtful it goes like straight there. If it went straight there as the crow flies in like a day or something, by Monday, it would be at 27.60, but more than likely it wouldn't do that. You're going to have some kind of reaction here. It's going to come back up probably into earnings. That's my guess going into the 9th. I'm very doubtful. There's no strong. I mean, I say that, but this is really bizarre to me right here, this move. So maybe, I don't know. Maybe it could come all the way back down to the ice. I guess it's not impossible. I should not say it's impossible because this is bizarre too. The way this M cross sets up is extremely volatile and just unusual. It is. It's very strange. It's not very regular, I guess, what I'm trying to say. We knew this was going to be the M, but I would never have guessed it'd be like that crazy. So what if it drops down to here? Is it over? Well, I mean, it doesn't look good, does it? But at the same time, has it broken through that ice? Not necessarily. So I'm just saying, like right now, 28 to $30, something like that. That doesn't seem wrong to me. We're already at 30, sorry. Like $28 down here doesn't seem wrong to me. If it takes a lot longer than that, it could even be as low as 24. If it drops down through here right now, I do think that's a weakness. You have to just kind of take it for what it is. This could be a very huge kind of a spring. We've seen those 1, 2, 3, 4 motions before, and they've been wild. It could be kind of a spring motion off 24, but then you'd still have to see some kind of like a bounce and a recapture of that. It just complicates things. You'd have to recapture everything again. So it could be something like this, I guess. All of these things are really derived from these 2 lines and the idea of the cat ears. That's it. So again, it sounds complicated. The reason I have so many scenarios in my head all the time is because I'm thinking about how do we navigate that and what happens. If you want to do it yourself, just draw those 2 markers here and just watch them. Put a marker at 24. That's going to give you, or by like 25 or something. That's like the center of it. It's like 24.87 or something like that. And then draw that line down, draw that line up. You'll see they intersect right there. There's like a macro trend right there as well. I think that's very significant because it would make sense that this would land on top of that before it goes. So you can see that macro trend has had no luck in breaking out until here. If it distributes in this region from 27 to 42, it could be anywhere in there, and it could still technically distribute because it's pushed up high before. distribute, push up, distribute. Very possible. All right. Yeah, it'd be crazy, but it's possible that it could continue to rise and still fall. So when do you actually know this thing's running? I think I've said this before, and I hopefully have been very consistent with it. I actually think it's around like this $50 region. You know, when you look at the big picture, there's not really a whole lot of mystery to that. If you just consider the fact that this made like a higher high here, it's like right there. If you look at the most top two areas, that's what the layman, no offense to anybody, it's just what the word that I would use. It's like the average Joe trader is going to use anyways. And it's actually correct, because if you look at where that is, again, this could be as late as January, over here. And if you're breaking that 50 going into January, that's going to squeeze you from, just look at the gap. There's nothing there, in terms of the creeks. From this $50 in January all the way up to like 120 easy, that's possible. So like I've looked at this before, and it doesn't really matter. You could place it over here. It's not significantly higher. It's still like 40, 50 to $60. It's not that different. So versus like 50 to 55, you know what I mean? Like, or 48 to 55 or something. I mean, it's super insignificant. So it almost doesn't matter to me. If this is in two parts, maybe it happens August and then again to some degree in January. Maybe it's a shorter move. That would be consistent with what we're seeing on AMC, because on AMC we're seeing that, well, it did happen. It does look like it's going to happen in two parts, but it might be a much smaller iterative move. And again, I think that's kind of consistent here on GME as well. We don't have to go as far to get to that top from where we are. And the only way you can go as far to get to that top up here is if you drop all the way down to like $6 or something, which is following this lower motion. Well, we have not seen that happen yet. All we know is that on the smaller picture, it's struggling right now. It needs to hold up here. If it holds up here, I don't personally see any reason to think that it's going to drop on the bigger picture. I don't. But if it doesn't hold up here and it starts slipping through, I also would have to say I don't see any reason why it wouldn't keep going down on the bigger picture. Because again, there's some kind of like macro creeks that we just did not check. And these are really significant low levels, but they are historically like important. If you look at where those guys reside and what that would mean for this. Remember that this is that early preliminary backup that we made, that auto reaction went all the way down to like 960 or something like that on GME. That is, looking backwards, that's like diving back into the previous all-time high kind of range. So to me, it would make sense on a grand scale, not small scale. It would make sense on the grand scale if we avoided the bottom here and push back up into a cat ear. We might be doing that to create enough momentum with short pressure to try to drive it down. That doesn't mean it's going to be successful. That's another question, but it certainly could be possible that that's what's going on. And then it drops through and tries to get through that floor into that deeper range, essentially trying to get back to what we think probably is that big breakout level right here at like $6. And I think it makes sense. I'm not saying that, again, I want it to happen, but this is one thing we've looked at quite frequently. And I've been very unapologetic on that for GME, because I think that it's possible that this is like a really key level. It apparently played a really big role in the distribution back here. And I'm sure for whatever reason, maybe GME has people that were in this stock from 1 million years ago who never got out, and they probably have an average right around there. I don't know. I mean, it's certainly possible. Seems unlikely that that's the case, but it's not that they're still in it. As opposed to it being like kind of a redo of the first. But yeah, I mean, this to me is pretty simple. I'm not particularly concerned if it drops here. One thing I noted was that if it drops here and it hits that mark, it may seem really, really bad, like, oh, it's dead, But that's, again, it's consistent with what we see on the big picture. Because if you look at what's going on here, this up thrust and then the low drop, that kind of motion of distribution is actually quite common, like an up thrust within a low drop. We just saw it on the micro. It wouldn't be that bizarre. I find it to be almost actually the same in some ways. And then what happened after that low drop is it bought all the way back up, right, to the top. So that'd be like us going down to 6 and then easily buying all the way back up to like 65. And then what? Well, I don't know. But it would be consistent. That's what I'm trying to say. So this disruptive kind of buy-in, maybe that's the same thing that we see here on the micro. It's a possibility that we saw that disruptive buy-in at 28 and then it sold back down and got lower somehow. I think that's a little strange still. It's a weird comparison, but it is in the right place when you compare the two. I mean, that is pushing up on the red and it looks like it's choosing up. And that was the same thing here to some degree. It pushed up into the red, just like this pushed up into the red. Talking about this motion from April right here, it looks eerily similar to the motion that we had right there, even in timing on the iterative scale. Anyways, it's kind of where I wanted to be today anyways. I was trying to just sort of give an overview of GME. We haven't done it in a minute. But now I'm kind of looking at it. I kind of want to explore that a little bit, that idea. I'm curious about it. There's some differences, I think. One difference would be like what exactly is the ice on the big picture? And did it already break it? Because when we go to the small scale, we might have to use 2 charts for this. Yeah, we may have to. I like this other chart the way it is, but I don't like doing this, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to add another one. So let's just take a look. Oh, what's on this chart? This is the Russell 2000. This isn't even like... Let's just get rid of them. I don't know. I don't like extra data being stored. There's a lot of extra data on these charts, so... That's interesting. You're wrong, Buxy. I probably was just talking about scenarios if it didn't break out. But you can see that it did. I mean, you can see that motion right there. It jumped above it, like perfectly. And we still got to that target, which is kind of interesting. But it never came back and checked that low there, did it? Actually might be worth remembering because that wasn't ever retested, was it? I don't know. I remember talking about that breakout and talking about different ways it might happen. So it probably was what we were doing. But what I want to do is see if I can get this just kind of framed gently. See if I can frame it the way I want to frame it. This is a bit tricky because GME is not, like AMC has very clear iterative pattern. And GME has it, but it's not always super clear. See, like I would have said this and this were the right ones, in which case this is doomed to fail, right? It looks like it's going to crap out. That's not good, Wixie. No, it's not. But iterations are complex. There's probably a bigger one as well. It's not going to $6 of that balance sheet and cash pile. Like I said, I'm not really talking about fundamentals necessarily. I'm really talking about the way that the so I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just suggesting that you have to take into consideration the directive input from bears and bulls. Bears and bulls have directive input on every stock in the market. And if you think about the future of GME is still in question. Even though they're looking really nice on the whole, if they can bring themselves into a better place, absolutely. Does it correct itself? Yes. Is it still worth what it's worth on the chart? That's another question. A lot of these institutional hedge funds, hedge funds, that's one of their biggest things they look at is like, does it equal, like price to earnings, essentially? Is it equal to what it says it's equal to? Well, if they look at it at $30, is it still equal to what they're earning? If the answer is no, then you still have a lot of potential for shorts. That's the thesis. They don't need anything else. They think it's overvalued. I don't know. That shouldn't be like offensive to anybody. I'm just saying like that's just kind of the way I would look at it. So I don't really necessarily think that $6 is off the table just because they currently are sitting on a lot of cash and other stuff. If the outlook is, well, it's doing better as a company, but it's not worth this much, and it's certainly not worth $130 a share after a split, you know what I mean? Like, that's the argument that the shorts would have. And then the other question is there still enough people that believe this is going to go up that they're buying and holding that could cause a squeeze, you know? And again, have something that happens that's not quite in line with what fiscal expectations are, which is what happened back here. And albeit, I still think this was potentially a spring, is what it looks like. Somebody took it up in addition to retail. I don't think you can look at it was that GameStop has a problem 10 to 20 years from now. It was a $2 stock at that moment. Yeah. There's a lot of little things that Roaring Kitty discussed early on that a lot of people, they kind of took his message and ran with it in different ways. But there's a lot of basic things that he looked at that were extremely like simple. Like a lot of his original ideas were simply that this was oversold, that it could potentially be worth a lot more if it's changed right in the right ways. You know what I mean? So I don't know. There's a lot of different, we could go on and on and on. So I would suggest that this iteration here with the breakout is somewhat similar to the larger one. And that's probably the way I would read it. So what I want to do is see if I can determine, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, but see if I can determine this wave should have been created as well. It might be this guy. Actually, that makes sense. Should be right here. That looks correct. Something like that, right? Might not be perfect, but that's pretty darn close. And then the other question is, did we already reach? It's a little bit willy-nilly, isn't it? Like it kind of goes off the rails here a little bit. I don't know. The other question is, did we already reach that kind of end goal? I'm not sure. Like, did we already hit this mark? That looks correct to me. It's a little messy, but it looks right. Meaning it doesn't hit the tops here perfectly. That's okay. So this buys up, pushes over. It's a little different because this one actually has the backup here. Oof, this is going to get complicated pretty fast. I think we need to just focus on like simple creek jumps and stuff. Because this marker doesn't actually matter. I made it look like it matters, but it doesn't really matter. Well, when in doubt, introduce like another variable here because I think if I'm not sure, I'd probably use RSI the most. That's usually the most helpful. And trying to determine like what's going on. It's hard to say. So this is the daily, this is the weekly. So there's a cross up here. There's a cross up down here. Actually, I didn't think about that. There would be another marker then. Would it be there? Yeah, I think that's it. Yep, that should be the one. That's interesting. I don't think I've done that one before. Not like on purpose. I mean, I'm sure it's there. We've used a lot of the angles here, but I mean, this definitely creates a bit of a range. It's not like one thing because you can kind of slide it down. But I think that's probably where it is. That's the resistance, and then it broke away from it, fails to go back up. And then it comes back up again here, and that's very similar to what we have, albeit this doesn't ever come back up high enough. But it is correct. There's the cross down. I think that's right. Why was that necessary, Booksy? Well, I think it's necessary because I have to have the parallel structure. Aha. To some degree. But that should actually represent... I don't think that's correct. I think it's way down here somewhere. Because there's like a little micro spring range right here. I think is actually more accurate. This is there, but it's not actually that dramatic. And it should be in the middle. There should be like another middle here. Yep. Divides that in half. That's where that should be. And it's in the right spot. That's important because then when I look at this, suddenly it clicks. See how this comes back to the middle, and then this comes back to the middle. I think that's pretty significant. So we are talking about the same thing. essentially. You see how this pushes up? Look at the major channel. Ignore the first part. I know that's there, but that's like a buying climax, and then it walks into a range. And this pumps back up all the way to that cat ear marker. Drops down through the middle. It's interacting with the center, which is what we see here. I might be a little bit off, again, because we may be in a situation where this is really trying to define where it is, and then it shifts this down a little bit. You know, it's almost insignificant because I guess one could look at this and say it's not really that important. That's what I'm trying to argue. It doesn't really make a huge difference. It's still interacting with the middle. So, yeah. So I think that's pretty accurate. I think that's correct, iteration-wise. This is the generation of the middle S-curve, of the S-curve here. This is like the middle cat ear here. It's flat, but that's okay. It's the right spot. And this interacts by going up high. This one, the reason it's not above the top is because, again, this area is low. There's another marker that I might use. I don't want to introduce it too fast, but it'd be this one. This is a long-term marker that typically signifies if you're going to have a wave back up, that's where it's going to go long-term. So it's possible that there's a long-term marker there that we haven't hit yet. This is out here in October. That would be consistent with an August run, potentially. Yeah, that's October 27th. That's just a rough estimation right now. I don't want to use it too much, but I'm going to keep it on the chart just to consider it as a possibility. Because this is one that is used in a wave schematic if you're going to come back up later. And oftentimes these kind of run in sync with each other, which does make me wonder if I got this angle right. Could it possibly be this and not be quite as steep? Actually, let's keep this one over on the side just in case. Maybe that works better in the middle. It does work better in the middle. Okay. So I think what we're trying to do is generate almost like an uptrend here. That does look better in the middle. I'm going to leave that one, and we'll just kind of keep this off to the side. So how does this play out, you know, on the big picture? Well, we have an S-curve here on the big picture that seems to suggest we go all the way back, potentially to the top, near the top of this channel, this rising channel, right? We'd also have one here that suggests something similar, because if it's iterating it and it's kind of doing the same thing it's always done behavior-wise, you would have that generation. You'd also have a generation from this peak going down to some low, this peak going down to some low. So we're missing something from here to here. We're missing like the red marker from here to here. And I am going to use a line, so I'm just going to keep it for now. I don't know where it is exactly, but we're missing something here to here. We're also missing something from probably here where it broke out of the creek up to some top. And right now, we don't know for a fact. We think it could be this blue one right here, but it's hard to say. I think it has more to do with the interaction than anything else, so I'm not sure yet. Somewhere around here going up, and I'm not guaranteeing it's going to definitely hit that peak, but it certainly looks like it might be planning that motion. So now we're going to just kind of break it into smaller parts and see if we can figure it out. AMC's at 339, it's down 2%. GME's at 29.73, it's down 4.7%. They're not looking particularly strong today, but most of the market's having some trouble. There's been a lot of back and forth on tariff stuff. I think a court ruled that Trump was not allowed to impose tariffs, which I'm actually happy with. I don't really care what your opinions are on whether the tariffs are good or not. I'm happy with it because I think it's a constitutional violation because he declared a state of emergency in order to use tariffs. But under normal circumstances, you're not allowed to tax without representation in the United States of America. That's the whole reason we fought part of the reason we fought a war for revolution is that we did not like one person being able to instigate taxes where we didn't have any representation on whether or not we were going to be taxed. A tariff is a tax. And so it's all in every other circumstance, unless it's an emergency, the only people who can tax are Congress. That's what the Constitution says. So if you're wondering why he declared a state of emergency, it was because he cannot do tariffs without a state of emergency legally in the United States of America. So in case you missed that part, and I was wondering why the court, which Supreme Court, hadn't ruled on it quicker, but nobody in Congress did anything except for a select few Republicans. Almost all the other Republicans decided they agreed, I suppose, with the emergency and or did not feel the need to use the separate power to push back on the executive branch. So whether or not that's because they were too chicken to do it and scared of blowback, which is very possible from their constituents and from the president, or because they genuinely did agree that we should have tariffs, that's another question for another day and not this channel. But that causes turmoil because if the courts say that he didn't have the constitutional authority to do that or call a state of emergency and it wasn't legitimate, then, and that was the ruling, I suppose, then the tariffs could just be, quite frankly, undone as quickly as they were done. It's a big deal. Normally with court proceedings, almost always, until it hits the Supreme Court of the United States, it could be an appeals court, it could be something else. It might hold up some stuff, but it ultimately wouldn't be determined as federal law of the land until it hits the judiciary at the highest level. So you wouldn't likely, unless it's the Supreme Court, I guess, you would see appeals. So it wouldn't happen overnight. So for just as many that have said one, other courts have said other things. So, I mean, it's complicated. And if you don't follow that stuff, it's very interesting because essentially it's game-changing stuff. We're doing things right now that will set legal precedents for the United States of America for all time. So you should be following it. It's a big deal. It's a branch type deal. It's really important. And so far, what the Trump administration has done is largely just tried to play offense and defense against everybody at the same time. So they've pushed back, saying that appellate courts at the low level should not be able to block executive orders. And you had some dissenting opinions on the Supreme Court level, but some were in agreement that a singular appellate court in some random district in the United States should not be able to block the president from doing something, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court has also really dragged their feet about taking up a lot of these things immediately. And there's been a huge amount of other things going on with the immigration, which frankly, the spaghetti on the wall technique seems to be working quite well on the whole because it causes confusion. So just throwing spaghetti everywhere and causing mass confusion and constantly moving pieces around seems to be the main strategy that Trump uses for his negotiations and everything else. So he's doing so much that people have to work to keep up with it. I don't know if I like it. Don't really, again, need to voice my opinion about everything, but you should be paying attention to those things because as the market goes, that would be a extreme deviation from what would be expected. Right now, we're looking at July 11th because of that tariff deadline. It doesn't look likely at all that he's going to hit deals with 120 plus countries. It's going to be more like 10 or 15 because it takes way more than 90 days. So the questions of, It's really another big gigantic fallout we're looking at if it's going to be April 2nd all over again. As of now, if the courts were to somehow intervene in that, it could change everything very dramatically. And I mean, I don't want to say that the market's all reactive in that way. It's not. A lot of that stuff gets priced in, but you can only price in what is known or what is coming down the pipeline. You can't price in the unknown. It's really hard. Somebody always knows more than somebody else. But in this case, I think it's important to keep your ear to the ground and just pay attention. So, and that's the most non-biased I can possibly be about all of that. I could be very biased if I want, and I have opinions, but I'm going to withhold those opinions and just tell you that's what's going on. That's just the facts. So determine what you want to determine about who's right, who's not right. I don't care to discuss those things. I'm just talking about that because I'm curious to see what's going to happen. And that could really change what we have expectation-wise on the market on the whole going into July, which is coming up. So anyways, let's continue on GME right now. So this push out to me looks fairly synonymous. So what I want to do is generate an S-curve. It looks very similar is what I'm trying to say. I want to generate an S-curve, but I have to find the right point of contact. I didn't actually use the bottom here, which might seem unusual, but I used where it jumped the creek. There's reasons for that. I've found personally that I'm a little bit more consistent, and that matters to me. So it's like, well, consistency is important. So I want to be as consistent as possible, and I find it is more consistent when I use the breakout point as opposed to something else. So the other question here is like, what's the midline? Collateral noodles. It's funny, except that there are human beings on the other side of all that, which is sad. So it's like funny, but it's not funny, you know. This right here is yeah, it's tax on other countries' products, but not us. That's not true. Not really. I mean, I guess at a tertiary level, it's true, but only if those aren't passed to consumers, which they largely are being passed to consumers. Our grocery bills have gone up like a lot, which almost doesn't make sense, but they have. And then those taxes, when you talk about imports and exports, there's retaliatory tariffs. I mean, like you're basically generating, it really doesn't matter if it's taxation. And taxation's taxation. I mean, it almost doesn't matter if it's on imports or exports because it's still taxation. Like you're basically just trying to like, if you say that, well, it's other countries, you're basically just trying to say that like, again, that this somehow circumvents that law. The argument is extremely simple-minded, which I appreciate because it makes it easy to just kind of say, well, is it or isn't it? And I don't think that Congress makes a distinction. Like, I don't think the Constitution makes a grand distinction between taxing the people and taxing in general. And yes, like, tariffs are tariffs, right? They've been raised and they were kept elevated. The taxes that he implemented in the first term, Biden kept. These are just points. These are just facts. I'm not arguing the facts. But the thing is like, a lot of people will look at that and they'll probably try to defend their candidate of choice. They'll try to defend Trump, or they'll try to defend Biden, or they'll try to defend Obama, or they'll try to defend Bush, or whatever. They pick a party and they want to defend that party, so they generate arguments. I'm not picking a party. I don't really want to get into a fight either because I want to focus on GME as much as I can here. But I'm not picking a party. I already told you I'm not going to like kind of spill my entire opinion here nonstop and just keep going on this. This is an aside. I was just trying to present to you, this is an argument. This is what's going on. Regardless of your opinion, it's news, it's an important news. But I'm not picking a political party. I'm picking what I think is, again, just facts. This is what's happening. And I have very strong opinions about it, and it's irregardless of political party. I don't like either political party. I think they're both screwed up in different ways. They pick issues that I don't agree with anybody on all the issues. That's because I'm an individual and I'm allowed to have my own opinions, and I formulate my own opinions about it. I don't formulate opinions based on what my political party says. And I also don't think that there's very much thought given to the repercussions of that. So I'm a big fan of keeping it as constitutionally straightforward as possible. And I like the idea of the separation of powers. I do not like that the executive branch over both political parties has largely been leveraged to try to get agendas done over the last 20 to 30 years, which just so happens to also be, and it's always been, the executive branch has always tried to grow for that reason. But that's the reason the other two branches exist, is to keep them in balance. There's tons of writings in the original founding fathers about the, and beyond that, going farther about the executive power and what that would do, but why it's meant to be kept in check. The whole point of the United States government is to keep it in check. So you can't have one person legislating. You can't have one person being a judge over something. You know what I mean? Like, it's supposed to be a checks and balance system. It's very elementary. It's that simple. And when one or two parties start fighting the other parties, that's fine. One or two branches start fighting the other branches, that's fine. It's supposed to happen. It's when one branch just kind of rolls over and just kind of gives the power that changes the dynamic of what's constitutional. So if you have a court precedence that the president can or can't do something, or that Senate can or can't do something, but then that changes, that's a dynamic change in the government system as a whole. It's not just as simple as my party wants to do this and I agree, or my party wants to do that and I agree. And the easiest way to check your bias at the door is just simply to say, if this was my political party doing this, would I agree with it? If this were the Biden administration and they were doing this, and the economy was doing what it's doing, and they were trying to go and push back and say the courts have no right to stop them. If Biden was saying, I don't think the courts have a right to stop me, and they need to be demonized and all this other stuff, and we need to grow the executive branch, would the Republican base be in upheaval right now? If it was Obama or Biden doing what's being done to the Constitution, not the laws, not the tariff stuff necessarily. You might even agree with it, even if it were another political candidate, but purely like from a constitutional perspective, changing the nature of the government so that you can have your agenda accomplished. So ignore the agenda, focus on, would this be okay if it were another party candidate based on what I know about the Constitution? If the answer is no, then you should not be in support of it, even if it's your own party. That's called it's a paradox essentially, and you're basically generating for yourself a schism in your personality and your belief system, where you're creating this dichotomy and dualistic nature, where you're saying, well, I will capitulate my ideals if it's in the interest of what I think is right in the moment. It's kind of the very definition of impulsivity, which I've learned is very, very bad for me personally. So when I look at it, I don't look at it as, what do I really want, tariffs or no tariffs? That's a completely different question. Completely different question to me. I don't see the connection at all in some ways with what is the executive power supposed to be able to do? What is the judiciary supposed to be able to do? Should the judiciary be able to legislate from the bench? Should the executive power be able to tax without Congress? Should they be able to legislate? Or should the legislative branch be the one legislating? Because there's a lot more representation in the legislative branch than there is in the judiciary and in the executive. There just is. And if that offends you that I think that way, I'm sorry. But I'm not going to, I say I'm sorry because I'm not going to sit here and like change to be less offensive, I guess, if that's the case. I don't personally see it as an issue of tariffs. I see it as an issue of there's a lot of things that are changing, and the executive branch over my lifetime really, has always done the same thing over and over again, which is every single time they're trying to do more and more and more, and they're circumventing Congress as much as possible because Congress has the power to stop them, albeit they don't always do it, right? When they're in agreement. It's a very unique system, and it works as long as it has worked because of the separation of power, because it's meant to be adversarial in some ways, is the reason that it works so well. When it stops being adversarial, there's a problem. So one of the comforts of living in the United States is that if you don't like your candidate, you just wait a while and then, flip-flop. We're in a insanely bipolar party system. We go from one extreme to the other. I don't like either extreme, and I've already expressed that. But that's one of the benefits. The other benefit is that you have the ability on these midterm elections to change, who's sitting in those Senate seats and stuff. And those are things that really change the dynamic of a presidency oftentimes. It's very simple, right? That's a great power to have, And no offense if you live in Russia, though I doubt if you live in Russia you're listening. But I don't want to live in a system where the executive branch has the power to do anything they want to do. I just don't like that. It's not what I want in a government. I like America as America is. There are other things we can discuss. When it comes to trade policy, we can come to fiscal policy. When it comes to social policy, those are discussions that can be had. We can have different opinions about those things. But as a United States citizen, we should all be in agreement on what makes the U.S. the U.S. is that uniqueness. I don't see that as a jab at a particular political party. I see it as this is a problem that's been going on for the last 30 years, and it's getting worse, arguably. So whether or not this goes through will determine what happens in the market, and that's why I brought it up. So I'm not arguing with any one person in particular in chat. I'm saying that if you're starting to argue with me about tariffs and other things, you're really missing my point. My point is that there's a battle in the courts going on right now, and that will largely determine what happens from a constitutional standpoint, like what changes in the next few years, which could drastically impact the current administration's agenda. And we already know that their agenda is right now to continue with these heavy tariffs. So we're just stating facts. That's it. Yes, the tariffs are partially a negotiation tactic, but they may not go away. They may not go back to 10% in some cases. That's going to definitely affect your bottom line if you hold stocks that are directly related to those import-export practices. And if you're somebody that really dislikes what I'm saying because you think that I'm basically fighting a political battle right now, Well, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you're misinterpreting what I'm saying. And I'm not trying to be middle of the road. I'm really not. I've had very strong opinions about a lot of issues, but this isn't really an issues thing for me. This is like what underlies those issues, which is the constitutional foundation of the United States of America. Like, what does that mean? And again, it's like one comes from the other, but one is talking about like your foundation. The other is talking about like, what do you put in the house? You know what I mean? Like, first we build the foundation and then everything else goes on top of that. And the rules that apply to it are based on that foundation. So stick to stocks, Booksy. Don't quit your day job. I know. Well, there's some kind of like good news, bad news here. So the good news, bad news is that I think this does exist. I think we just found it. And I think it actually is very low. So I'm thinking that this 2483 level is actually that middle. The reason is that I think it's the same middle that already exists. So I think what we're doing is we're iterating the same thing on a smaller scale. It looks the same to me because when you observe the 20, it's the same marker right here. I have a dotted line on it. When you observe that level and you look at where that's dropping through and then breaking back above, it's that same $24 level, 2483. It's the same thing right here. So it's this, in this case, I think the GameStop iteration, I'm going to move on from the political stuff. Okay. And again, hey, if you don't agree with me and you think that I'm way off my rocker, that's fine. You know what I mean? I applaud you for disagreeing openly. Please be courteous, to other people, including me. Be respectful, and respect yourself by doing that, right? And then that's it. Like, we don't have to keep going. I can just go back, kind of move on. We can all have opinions and discuss them, and we can do it in a healthy way. There's always been hotheads, when people get in arguments, always. The internet has made it easier to be kind of nasty. So I strive to be as civil as I possibly can, given my own past and my own mistakes using the internet and all this other stuff, to be kind of nasty at times to people. Like, I'm in the same boat. I've done those things at times and not realized it, or I have realized it. But we can change. We don't have to be that way. So if you find yourself, I'm getting really frustrated or I'm upset, just walk away and you're good, Stop being patronizing, Booksy. Don't tell me what to do. The only time I'm going to intervene is if someone's being just outright racist or like ugly, something like that, right? Then I might say you're out. Otherwise, you're free to express yourself. Just be civil. Because I don't see that as a problem, having disagreements. That's usually a good thing. Okay? So right now what I'm doing is I'm looking at this as if this is... yeah, and the thing is, it's kind of ugly because I think that this S-curve down is really steep. Like, it's super, super steep. And again, it's like pointing towards that $6 area, but it's like really low. I don't know how else to draw this. I'm trying to figure out if I made a mistake and this is actually the middle, like this area, if that makes sense. And I can't really determine it yet. I know it's going to sound weird, but it seems like there might be more than one possibility here. This is confusing. Yeah, like I said, SK Whoosh, I'm not reading your comments now. There's nothing like, I understand what you're saying. I actually kind of agree with the argument that you're saying that people have kicked it down the road and all this stuff. You're totally right. Whether the president has the power to do it, that's another question, though. Should they be able to declare a national state of emergency in order to invoke taxation? And what does that lead to? You can't be single-minded about it. You know, what does that lead to? And again, if it were another party, would you be okay with it? Given that it could lead to other things that you don't agree with. That's the question. So I have I'm not going to derail. I'm just answering one person. As long as you're like thinking about it, you know, I feel like it's okay. It's good to have the discussion. There's just so many people that take it at face value, and I get why they do that, because they're frustrated and they're tired of the way things were, I guess. But you have to kind of think of the elephant down the road, you know, like, because it's gonna create changes that we may not like if it's not done right. I think there's a lot of problems that could be handled very differently, that are being handled not the way I would appreciate them being handled. And they are problems. So this seems very reasonable too, this marker right here. So this is a question mark I have in my brain right now, is this and I don't know the answer yet. So before you get all figure it out, Booksy, I'm trying to figure out where this S-curve actually is. Because on the one hand, this seems right. But I didn't measure this one from there. See, so something's wrong. I'm being inconsistent. I didn't measure it. I measured it from this point, and I'm trying to remember why I did that. Why did I measure it from there? I guess there's more than one measurement. This is the bigger one. So this measures to the middle, or roughly to the middle. Kind of goes beyond it. It looks like 250, which is great if it gets there. Still around January. But that's a pretty extreme move. I think because I'm using this top, it's imperative that we find that spot, because if we don't have it, we can't make a judgment. So here's where my dilemma is. Right now, it looks like maybe what we're doing is we're accidentally finding this one. We're not using like the lowest low. That's what I'm wondering. Or it could be that when this bottom established here, it actually just generated one that was just its own beast. Seems possible too. Because this is very steep. But this also marks through there and hits the top of the next one, which would be significant. Actually, that looks kind of right. I should leave that there. But it ignores, the problem with it is it ignores that breakout here. This intersects the breakout so perfectly. It's so tight. It works really, really well. And then it turns into that S-curve, and it even has like the hit there. For some reason, this one ignores it. It like does not hit that. There's no doubt this is being used. That's not the question. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4. But so which one is the middle? I don't know. Maybe both. Maybe there's two S curves. Sometimes that's the answer. Sometimes there are, because sometimes there's like a lesser one that's being used for another purpose, and I'm finding it, and I'm like, why am I finding this one, right? But I'm not able to find the other one. That could be it. It certainly looks correct to some degree. It should have been higher though. It should have been like right there. Well, maybe that's that secondary motion up to 47. That's the one we're trying to follow out right now, going into this earnings. That would be good to know if we're going to go up to like 47. It would make sense. We were talking about a potential that it drops and then just rebounds. That would be like here and then just right back up right after earnings. It's a good buying opportunity if it happens, so we should keep that in mind. Usually, again, there's another marker there. Could be this one. Yeah, that one. That one looks pretty good. Oh, there's this guy too. This is actually steeper. That goes way out there though. So that's there, and then there's another one. Well, like I said, guys, I'm not going to talk politics all day. I really want to work on this GME chart. Talking politics would be irresponsible use of time. That's the one. So what I did is I looked at the lowest. All right, so there's a trend here, right? But then there's just kind of push through that trend. So I'm looking at that kind of like extremity. And that's the most extreme bottom right there, right here. Okay. And then I looked at that and I looked at this and I said, where does it have that initial reaction to? And it's right there. So there's secondary reactions that happen, but this is kind of the first one where it comes back. It seems to hook on like a nothing spot. That's usually the one that indicates some kind of a major move later. So the S-curve motion on the big picture is often tied to that, which is why and we have to say that because, again, if we don't say that, we wouldn't recognize that that's a possibility later over here as well. So there's a sort of a secondary motion there that has to be met, like this concept of like it's got this other motion here is really significant because that would be met later on. That goes right to the top at 120. So these are bullish directives, bearish directives, that kind of thing. So we could do, oh no, that's really steep. I don't think that's going to work. Those are like the last two there. It's way up there. Just take a break for a while.
No, it's just this magic move. He bit me off. Literally. I was getting like this receipt, and I bought this receipt that was really expensive, so I had to do what I was supposed to get it. And then when I went back to plant it,
You need a bigger pot.
I bought it.
I know, but sometimes you need a different pot size. It won't be grown unless it's in a, is it a flux weed?
No.
Because the flux weed has to be a large pot. Some of them have to be medium, some have to be large. It won't show up unless you have the right pot.
Oh.
I did that yesterday and I had to go buy a new table. That's funny. That's okay. So this is a possibility. There's a lot of markers here, but that's a possibility for like later on. Okay. So we would concede that that's possible based on a number of things, including this bigger picture, which looks like it goes up to the top. So 120 seems like a pretty important marker for the chart overall, which is the top, and that makes sense. There's been a desire to go back up towards that top for quite a long time. The original triangulation is way back here, and it does seem to pinpoint to some degree. It's a little bit difficult maybe to get it just right, but to some degree it pinpoints like a higher high if you look at it like that. If you look at the base trend of it, it would be right here. And that certainly suggests in that pocket by the end of the year, if you're looking at that as a triangulation of like coming back up, it might even be as close as July, you know. I wouldn't go that far just yet. So point being is that this indication right here is usually a good sign, because if it correlates to the bigger picture, it's probably a fair estimation of like a top of an S-curve or something. So I think this S-curve does exist. I'm going to leave it there. But there's another one which comes from the bottom here, and I'm looking at this as if it's kind of a ramping version. And I'm wondering if this motion correlates to this motion. It's just this is higher. I'm not sure. Not sure yet. I'm still streaming.
I don't know where you get those table sizes.
How do you know the size? Go to the menu.
No, what, like, no, like the table. How do I get the more table sizes?
The scrolls and tomes place.
Okay.
So if I look at this, I'm trying to just determine where that is. I'm not really sure if that constitutes the same motion or if it's this early motion, which is a big difference. One would indicate that you haven't even made that push yet. The other would say, well, you did do it, and it's actually just a longer form of the distribution, which seems likely to me, but I don't know. Because in both cases, this is jumping the creek, and this jumps the creek. So I'm trying my best to do an accurate determination here, but so then what? Then you run into a problem because there's no way to do this. It was probably there. So how do you do it? We had to find that middle point where it rejected off that middle. I think this is a bit of a mess because I think this is very flat and the other one's not. Because I actually think that might be here, which is kind of farther out, and it could even be there, which is in September, which sort of adds up because that looks more accurately correct. That's like September 3rd. Again, it matters because that, yeah, it's August 22nd. It is the same. It changes the dynamic of this a bit. You have to then look at this as if this is the top pivot, which is interesting because that's not where I would have put it. I would have put it down here. So I think these S-curves do exist, but I think that this is actually the one that might matter more. I'm trying to figure out what if anything I missed. I don't know, man. RSI makes that case look really dumb. It makes me feel like I'm using the wrong thing because I'm like, why would you not use that? That doesn't make any sense. It looks like it should be here. Like that guy. And I'm trying to remember that this is iterative, and I think we already found this one because when we did it, it was like here and here. And those were the middle, when we divided it by a quarter system, we kept dividing it like a half and a half and a half. Like half of this full thing was right here. So it made sense because of that. I'm trying to remember that might still be the case. So let's see. So if we're going to look at February 2026, it's not that far away. Roughly. That's the rejection area from here and from here. And it goes to, at latest, maybe February 23rd. Oh, so we're like right on the middle right now. Earnings is like right in the middle. Well, fancy that. Pretty close. That's March. February 23rd is what I have, but it could be like March the 6th or something. You never know. I guess we need to determine, because I think earnings reports on the 9th. I don't know. I've seen multiple misleading information. That's February 11th, if it's on the 9th. That's pretty darn close, guys, to what our expectations were. So, let's see here. So what would that mean? It would mean that this hits a midpoint on the cat ear at that date. This is actually quite consistent because what we're basically saying is that one of the short-term S-curves should terminate right around this pocket here. And there's a bit of a window, but I think it's correct because if you look at the dates, what we're saying is like an S-curve should terminate here. Like there would be a middle somewhere in this pocket region. We definitely have one on May 12th. So if you take it back to like May 12th, this looks like December. If you take it up to kind of the extreme, which is maybe the 13th, something like that, June 13th or June 12th, this looks like March, which is very significant, right, date-wise. Very big differences. But in reality, we kind of already know on the big picture. If we're pretty sure about the big picture, then we already know it should be closer to February than it is to December. So I think there's again, a good chance that this is pretty accurate. So this would be one middle. Which means this S-curve is like super steep. Like ridiculously steep. If that's the case. Maybe there's something else I'm missing though, because it could be that the S-curve is not actually generating from the tippy top. Maybe it's generating from like lower down, like this guy, which may be more reasonable. And it could be both. which is also a frustrating analysis point. But there are times where you have multiple motions. And I'm guessing that a lot of these layups are those motions anyways. So like if we were to pivot this around, it's probably going to show that they're all being used. Like these layups. It's a radial symmetry of sorts, or a radial function. That one's pretty strong because that actually hits like multiple times. This one's a little bit weak. Not really sure I like that one. It's tough. So what I was trying to do was determine, we started off with this just to sort of determine whether the iterations were going our way or not. And I'm kind of getting a little lost in the weeds because of the setup. I'm trying to figure out where that red S-curve is and where the other one is. It's kind of done, isn't it? Does seem like it. Well, what if I'm like slightly off? What if it's this one instead? That changes so much though. But it does work quite nicely with the top. It's like there's not really much there's not much to answer here. Like it doesn't really give you the right answer either way. This one seems more accurate because when we use the S-curve here, I think it generates a better S-curve. Like seems right. But we already know that like this is really slow in some ways. That's definitely it. I guess my question is, maybe we're not using the right point at all. We should be using this one or this one. And that's why this is looking wrong, because it seems right. I don't know. Or it's just curved or something. So we're just not getting the right answer, period. The curvature is causing some more problems. Okay, let's just try to eyeball it. We know it's one of these points right here, so we should be able to sort of have some kind of determination without too much trouble. It definitely seems like it's going the other way. So maybe this was following it down, but then just stopped. That would make sense. Just like this one kind of goes the other way. This goes the other way. That does make sense. So instead of going this way, and I don't know, man, the determination of this is a little sketchy. I don't really know why the middle's so high up, but it just seems like it is. That makes sense. That would be like a full retracement too, back down to the floor. And like how long would that take? It seems right. And then the middle is actually Yeah, the middle's right where it should be, right at that 28. So that's like a 50% marker back down to the floor. So that S-curve would be here. And then I guess the reason it's where it is because this is where it jumps that middle creek. And it is a curve because it ultimately did jump, but it took this really bizarre like flattening route to get there, which is why the angles aren't working. So it doesn't jump until right here, which is probably the middle. Yeah, like right there, which is probably like the middle of this S-curve. So it looked really wonky when I was trying to do it a minute ago because I couldn't find the marker. But I think that's probably right. So this is very, red looking. It adds up to being about where that breakout is. And we may be able to do it a little bit gentler by like kind of considering where that breakout is. We're not doing that. We're kind of looking at the big picture down to the bottom. But this red S-curve goes down to where the kind of where that breakout is. Ours may be a little more shallow or a little more, I guess, deep. It's a more extreme motion anyways. Like the walk down here is very like extreme. So I wonder if we're getting it wrong because we're going too far or we're going too short. That could be another problem. Because if that's the middle and it didn't jump until here, November. Man, I don't know. Well, and this is also a bit different because in this case, there's a greater distance between the beginning and then this beginning. But this one has a very narrow, it's like 2 days. So there's almost no distance between the two, from where this starts and where this ends. It's very, 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 very short. Whereas this has quite a long time. Proportionally, it's probably right, but like still, it's different in some ways. I'm not sure. Kind of strange. It really challenges my head, to be honest. I'm kind of like getting stuck because I'm thinking about these levels and I'm wondering if the way this built out, it's so like flattened. It's so different. In general, it looks fairly similar. You have this dive below, it jumps the creek, and then it pushes up. So you have this dive below, jumps the creek, pushes up. My question is it possible that I'm a little early because this motion right here could represent like the sign of weakness before it broke out and ran up, just like we had one right here. In which case, I'm actually really early, right? Like super early. Because this would be like only the first motion down, It'd be like this back up with this motion here. So I would wrongfully be charting this curve thinking it's finished and it's really doing this. And we haven't actually seen it finish yet. You see the difference? Both of them are complete S-curves. They're both correct in some ways. I don't know. I like that better because this actually came back down towards the floor, which makes more sense and this being like a breakout point, but it's possible this is like the first S-curve. So I'm going to kind of keep that in the back of my head. If that's the first S curve, then this is the pivot middle and not this. And those are really different markers. So that's why I'm hesitant. It's very different. Both might be somewhat true, but it changes a lot. It would imply that you really haven't gone into the upthrust yet, which is this. So those are pretty different. I mean, that's a hugely different call out, so to speak. I don't know. Fundamentally, this accomplishes the same thing as this. I'm going to try to just keep it like that and leave it alone from there. I can't do both. Not at the same time anyways. So it doesn't really make any difference at this point. I need to just kind of pick one, go with it. Yeah. I think it's unwise to do it the other way. But this is a problem. Does that mean that like that upthrust was supposed to be like, why is that where it is? It's in the right spot too. Yeah, so my concern is warranted. There's something wrong. Either I'm doing it wrong or there's something else going on here that I'm missing. But there's something wrong with this because this made sense to me as the middle of the two ears, like the wave, I suppose you would say, and then the S curve. But if you look at it that way, then this is really like already abandoned that S curve. Because I cannot, I mean, it's hard for me. Maybe, again, I'm missing something, but there could be like a middle junction that's just higher than expected. Or it's just going to go down. It's just going to drop instead. It's going to do this motion and come back down. I mean, I hate to say that's like the simplest, but it is. It's like the simplest explanation is that this is destined to go low into August because the only other explanation is a little bit awkward and I'd have to sort of redraw it all, which I don't really want to do right this second anyways. This did come all the way back down, just like this one did. So maybe it's done. It's complicated. Yeah, still just trying to strive to see where that should be and where to illustrate that best. And I'm not really sure I'm going to be able to get a good grasp on it today. I'm trying my best, but it's just not happening. It doesn't seem like it's happening. And I don't know why, but it seems like it's shifted over quite a bit. So if I use this breakout right here, that means that I'd have to really consider using the larger breakout here. I can't, it's like, that goes out to 2027. That's super far away, you know? But that's what I'd have to do because you can't can't just switch it and then say like, well, it's just that for this case, you know? So this is the problem. So GameStop has an iteration here, but they don't proportionally work out. Like if you use the longer one, it looks fine short term. And I could take that and say, well, that's actually where it should be right there. And yada, yada, yada. This is going to come back up. That does work. It's like a double top cat ear kind of thing. But what that would suggest on the short term here would also implicate on the big term that this is going to be not fun. Because if that were the case and it does something exactly the same way, then what we would have to surmise is that this is indeed in the same spot, but that this motion right here is really like this guy. You see what I'm saying? That does not feel good. So what that would mean is that the next several months would be like downside. And it kind of ignores, well, and this is the weird thing. I don't actually think it ignores that pop in January. That's the freaky thing here, is that the measurement actually works quite well. That same measurement that we were using, but it doesn't measure to the right spot. It measures here. So if you look at that, check it out. See, this still measures to, this is what I'm trying to say is like, this is what's really disturbing, is that this still measures out to being a pop right here in February 2026. So the original measurement isn't wrong. It still has a pop here, but it does something like this instead of going all the way up. And then it comes back down again, which is horrendous. And I'm like, maybe this is just some kind of fluke and it doesn't matter, but then why does it measure out the way that it does? I don't know. It's clearly in the right spot here and the same spot that we have as the middle measurement here. But instead of going and ripping, it doesn't rip. It goes down all the way. And I don't think this necessarily goes to this level here in November, like at 6. Not necessarily. But it would have to go below this. And that's where the rubber meets the road, because you'd have to have the same kind of motion where the point of it is to go down and create a major sign of weakness, but then you're going to take it all the way back up later. That would be distributive. I mean, it would definitely work. But the goal would have to be the same. You'd have to have a similar end in mind. Maybe we already have the answer, because this is actually the bottom and the second bottom. We already have a bottom and second bottom. So the answer isn't that it goes down to 6. The answer is it's just going back through here. Yeah. Sorry, guys. That is kind of the conclusion, though, because this whole bit going into earnings last time with that offering and all this other stuff, I'm not saying it has to be this way. That would be really, really, really tough sell. But I think I can't ignore it, so I'm just going to kind of do what I can do. And what happened is that it did something different than expected, which is came down and broke through that trend. Granted, this may already have done that, so there could be an indication of this maybe doing it. But what I'm seeing is that this marker right here, which originally I had kind of put on the chart just to sort of see it, I'm thinking this is probably correct. And it is going to go down to like $9. I don't think it's going to go all the way to 6. but I think it's possible this could drop to 9 by September. Again, not pleasant, but it's there. So I'm going to guess that this marker is actually the creek they're going for, because I don't know what else you'd be going for down here. There'd be another intersection. It's the only one that makes sense. Yeah. Right there. How is that any different than AMC though? I mean, AMC was going to do that. The only difference is that this is just higher up before it happens. We wouldn't know until it happens anyways. So the same rules apply that we were talking about earlier. You'd have to see that breakdown and all that jazz.
Look what I made.
That looks good. But this is something that I can't really ignore. So it's consistent with one of those models of distribution where this comes too high and then breaks through that floor here. So the warning level, if you're wondering like, well, how do you know that that's going to happen? I don't. Okay, I don't know for sure. But what I would say is that the warning level is the same, because if you look at this and you think this is a distributive action, and it did come below on the short term, it did come below that ice. If it breaks through that again, it's more than likely going to just capitulate. Then you have to look at where would it be going, right? And we've got one marker here. It's very similar to the big picture. I just did this on the big picture, actually, because we looked backwards and we were looking at this guy, this red line coming down, right? We just did this. And then we also looked at this rising ice. But in the case of the local trend, it's already kind of made that advancement here down to it. It's backed up. That would be entirely consistent with what we would see on a big picture. You would suddenly go all the way down, and then you'd have some reaction and back up. So in this case, there's another trend here. It's very low. And this is kind of what I'm trying to get at, is that if this is consistent, and it usually is, what happens is that this is already pointing down towards some potential bottom, right? And you can see this goes pretty low. Like this actually goes all the way down, and that's the higher mark, by the way. Jump like the early creek here. That goes all the way to like 14. I bet that if we took this and parsed it out, this probably ends up going to near the same spot. It does. It comes down here. So, and then even more so, if you take these tops, it comes right to that pocket right there. So there's a lot of strong indication that the micro and the macro are both pointing towards a low in August, September, to come all the way back down. And what this accomplishes can't be, unfortunately, can't be verified unless it breaks the ice. So we just have to hope it doesn't break the ice. And then even more so, would it do something else? Well, so here's the weird thing. So I was just doing this and I'm like, there's something wrong because there's two different markers in the middle. One is here and one is here. And that kind of makes sense because you'd have two different layers of sizing, like on a wave here and on a bigger wave. You should have more than one middle. And I might be a little bit confused, but there's a certainty to this one that this is basically the same as the macro middle that I was looking at earlier, but it doesn't measure out right. It measures out wrong. It measures out to this breakout here, which then reversed and went low, and it was already an SOW. So what that means for us potentially is if this came down into September or August, this pops hard and then it drops again, which is very confusing. You're probably like, this doesn't make any sense, Bugsy. I know, but hear me out. Because what it would indicate to me is that it does indeed finish, not this one, but it does indeed finish this downtrend, which this did finish. I mean, it came down on it. Came down to the bottom. The thing is that this is positioned upward. So it did come back to there. If you look at the S curve, ignore the fact that it didn't go all the way. We know it didn't go all the way, right? Did it come down and finish that? Yeah, I mean, it tried. This could be very similar, where it kind of like tries to go down and finish it, and it doesn't have to finish the whole thing. It doesn't have to go to 6. It could just come down to like anywhere right here. It'd be the same, essentially. And this might not be a happy thing to discuss because, again, it doesn't make you feel warm and fuzzy inside. But what it does do is it gives you a better picture of like what would the distribution look like. And what it appears to be, and it is quite ugly. I just can't see how that timing makes any sense, but man, it's tough. This hurts my brain. I mean, more literally, it looks like it breaks afterwards. So that's why I'm wondering if there's a change. Something happened. It's the GME thing, maybe, to some degree. Or somebody just got out of the play. Why is this so complicated? This should be simple, but it's not simple. I guess we already talked about the simple side of it. The simple side of it is watching that triangle and seeing where that goes next. That's the simple side. Because that's the side that is the most easy to track. You don't have to like kind of make a bigger picture necessarily. You kind of just have to watch the small scale. But I'm watching this and I'm like, well, there is an S curve that goes up higher. Seems to go all the way up here. I don't think that's to be ignored. But I'm wondering in the back of my head, this is what I'm about to say. I'm wondering in the back of my head if what we're really experiencing is like this. Again, this right here, but we're experiencing it on a bigger picture. So yeah, it will go up. You know, it's not going to go back to all-time highs, but it will go up again. Maybe even as high as this. But then this is still missing, Booksy. You're not thinking straight. Okay. All right. The other possibility is that sign of weakness, which this almost doesn't make sense, but that sign of weakness already happened here. It's like the same motion, which is even more confusing, which I don't really want to go too deep into. Because what we're saying is like if that happened, then this is like a cross up and it should come back down one more time, but then it would break out. If that breaks out again, we're really just talking about a June run up, because a June 9th or June 6th run up or something like that. Because if that continued up to this top, from an iterative perspective, then it should go back to maybe not all-time highs, but it should go back to here, 84. It doesn't, though, go to new all-time highs. It just hits like 80. and then it crashes. How quickly does it go? Why does it only go to 80? Because you're basically... This is so crazy. You're on like more than one level. You've created a weakness, but it's the confusing thing about it is the that's super confusing. So because it's like the layers overlap and intersect and they're like folded. They're almost like folded on top of each other. They exist at the same time. Basically what we're saying is that the this has been met, but it's missing like that motion here. So you've already made that motion there. You've made that motion there. And then it's going to do this, and on the big picture it's going to do this. And so that actually works. But then the question is like, well, does this SOW here then play out? I mean, I don't think it does because it can't. If this is going to go all the way up to 80, then this doesn't play out right now, right? It can't possibly play out right now. This would go to like 50, and then it would basically have to like come back and like go again. You know, I'm not even talking about timing yet. I'm just talking about where that is. So it's very, very opposite land because I just said a minute ago it would go down. The thing is like it just depends on what happens right here. Because if this were to drop and go down, then you have to then look at this as if the iterations are actually finished. Because remember, this came up twice. Push high, and then it retreats all the way back down to near the base where it broke out. And that would be comparable to this coming up and then trying to go up again and failing, whether it's here or whether it's up at like 50, right? You get like a double motion. You get some kind of like up thrust right here, and then you'd come all the way back down. Distinctly different. So in one scenario, without going like crazy detail, in one scenario, yeah, this is the weakness. This is the weakness. So bizarre. Did you lose internet? So did I. Our internet's been acting garbage lately. There's nothing really to look at on AMC. I mean, we looked at AMC like nonstop for like 2 days. So I was trying to focus on GME because I haven't looked at GME at all. There's really not much to say about AMC just yet. The question is exactly as it was. There's no different. Nothing's changed. So there's a sense in which this easily comes back down going into August, and then it could have one more move up. That's the only real big question mark I have right now is like, are we going to iterate again this guy and do one more move up? Is the expansion done? It may not be. I'm not trying to be like cryptic or anything, but it may not be done yet because